you know, it's not something I can opt out of, really, for my job. So, you know, that's a factor as well.
Indeed.
We have to be switched on all the time.
Here is a story that surfaced today. I'd just like to ask you if you think it's true. This is the sound of someone eating potato crisps. And this is the sound of someone...
It drives me nuts.
Me too.
This is the sound of someone extracting crisps from a potato crisps packet. Does that sound like someone getting potato crisps out of potato crisps?
It sounds like a really annoying person behind me at the movie theatre.
Does it annoy both of you? It seems to, when people eat potato crisps and it isn't you.
The eating thing, there's that condition that sometimes, and it's worse if I'm really tired, if someone eats in my ear, I want to cause them violence.
Violence. Crisp violence. And at Oxford
I booted
University...
someone out of my office once.
Seriously?
Wow.
Yeah. Get out until you finish chewing on whatever the hell you're chewing on, otherwise I'm going to strangle you.
Really?
Yeah.
And you took a firm line.
Yeah.
And an Oxford University professor, experimental psychologist Charles Spence, says both potato crisps and the bags they come in are designed to be noisy. It makes crisps taste better and fresher. He conducted a sonic experiment in which participants ate crisps while wearing headphones. They said they tasted more stale and spongy when they couldn't hear the crunch. The sound of the food matters, he says. So if that is so, why don't we have more food that makes a noise? Aha.
That depends on how you eat it, and then that depends on how mad I get with you.
Well, I mean, to be honest...
I'm never going to have lunch with you.
I feel like the main draw card of potato chips is the high fat salt content. Like, let's not, you know, I don't feel like the sound would make that much difference to me.
No, well, that's right.
You know, they're delicious.
Well, the other example he uses is a champagne cork. And champagne, you can understand, but chips sitting in a bowl presumably are just as Moorish as chips in a bag, no?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, counter research from our panel. And do
They're
you
less
agree?
offensive in a bowl.
Less offensive?
Because of the lack of the crinkling behind. Yeah, okay, I can see that.
Just never open a packet of crisps near Chris.
I've learned a lot of things today, and that's one of them. It's top of my list.
Who would have thought?
Yeah.
And do you agree with Professor Ian Fisk, food chemistry at the University of Nottingham, that dipping a digestive biscuit or a ginger nut into a cup of tea really does make the biscuit taste better? Or does it just make the biscuit agreeably softer? Panel.
Oh, you're asking the tough questions today.
Oh, look, I've saved them up for the end.
I think it makes them taste better. Have you ever done that Tim Tam thing where you bite off like the ends and you suck your coffee through it? It's great.
In Australia, they call it a Tim Tam orgasm.
Oh.
Beg your pardon.
It's true. I saw it on TV. Must be real.
People do that with ginger nuts too, I'm sure, don't they? Because ginger nuts hold together quite a long time after you dunk them.
I don't know. It's just that, you know, you sit down and you have your cup of tea and your biscuit, and it's a nice time.
Okay.
And I didn't think anything much made digestive biscuits taste better.
That is true.
Is anyone going to mention banking deregulation and the growth of debt? Asks a texter.
No.
Not today.
Maybe next time you have me on.
Maybe a New Zealander can control Australian water, but not New Zealand water, because Barnaby Joyce, says a texter, is the water minister. Oh, that's really interesting.
Brilliant.
I didn't know that. Brilliant. Chris Weekharter, thank you so much for your company today.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. And Nicola Keane, nice to have you back.
Thank you.
Come back again. That's us for today, everybody. Thank you for your company. The panel returns tomorrow, and Checkpoint arrives round about now.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight, Australia's Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce is confirmed as having New Zealand citizenship by descent. What does that mean for his political future? We'll go live to Canberra for the latest. This is very bizarre. Also tonight, the government announces a $100 million social investment fund for mental health, but how much of it will increase the pay of community mental health workers? One DHB warns Checkpoint of a looming catastrophe. So many of them are leaving for bigger money elsewhere. Also tonight, a gunman remains on the loose after a shootout in the Waikato town of Morrinsville yesterday. Whanganui parents fume over a $10 fee for children at an overflow medical centre. And the owners of a Bay of Plenty hostel introduce a $50 bond for New Zealanders.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The government is promising to transform mental health services in order to build resilience in children and young people. It's just released details of 17 initiatives planned under a new social investment approach to mental health. Our health correspondent Karen Brown reports.
$100 million was earmarked in this year's budget for mental health social investment projects. It's now been revealed $25 million is for expanding and improving primary and community mental health and addiction care. That covers the training of 250 youth peer support workers, 125 community care workers and 250 nurses, social workers and others. Another $11 million goes to schools to help them identify issues and provide rapid support. Ko Karen Brown tēnei.
Meanwhile, the Ministry of Health has written to DHBs telling them not to pay their mental health workers the same as aged care and support staff. The document leaked to Checkpoint tells chief executives any payment to mental health staff would be a breach of the Public Finance Act. And you can hear more about this on Checkpoint shortly. Opposition politicians in Australia are demanding the country's Deputy Prime Minister stand aside until the High Court rules on his citizenship. Barnaby Joyce has revealed he may be a dual citizen because his father was born in New Zealand. Under the Australian Constitution, anyone with dual citizenship cannot stand for federal election. Mr Joyce says he was alerted to the situation after inquiries were made by the New Zealand Labour Party.
Needless to say, I was shocked to receive this information. I was born in Australia in 1967 to an Australian mother. I think I am fifth generation. My father, who was born in New Zealand, came to Australia in 1947 as a British subject. In fact, we were all British subjects at that time.
Barnaby Joyce. The Internal Affairs Minister, Peter Dunn, says he understands Mr Joyce has started the process of renouncing his New Zealand citizenship.
And this will be the subject, I think, of the court case that's now pending in Australia. But again, my advice is that really that doesn't matter, because the question is, was he a citizen at the time of his election to the Australian Parliament? And the answer is yes.
Peter Dunn. Mr Joyce says legal advice suggests he has not breached the Constitution, but he's asking the High Court to rule on it. The Selwyn district southwest of Christchurch has been hit by widespread flooding. 2 schools closed early today and fire and emergency has been helping locals to sandbag properties. One school, Leaston Primary, was completely surrounded by water. Its principal, Linda Taylor, says it's not uncommon for the area to flood, but this is one of the worst she's seen in the last decade.
This time it took us a little by surprise because of the suddenness of the rising of the water. It was fine this morning, and then at about lunchtime we kind of looked out the window and thought, gosh, there's a small river running down the road. That's not common.
Linda Taylor of Leaston Primary School. The Anglican Church is considering gifting Christchurch's Cathedral to the people of New Zealand. The building has stood derelict since the 2011 earthquakes. Conan Young reports.
The church wants to demolish the cathedral and build a new one, but heritage advocates want it restored to its former glory. The church was going to put the 2 options to a meeting of clergy and other members next month, but the synod will now vote on a 3rd option of gifting the cathedral to the government. This would involve it becoming a public building, with the church being granted permission to use it at Easter and Christmas. In Ototahi, ko Conan Young tēnei.
The founder of Kaikohe's Safety Patrol, Tony Taylor, says the town's new youth centre offers new hope for local teenagers. Te Uma o Te Kona, a youth space funded by local trusts, the Ngāpuhi Runanga and central government, was opened today. Mr Taylor says the attempted break-in by children at a service station in March made the whole town resolve to change things.
Everybody's been saying they wanted a youth centre. They've got it. We've had several in Kaikohe before, but this one's got a real positive feeling behind it. The locals are behind it. I'm behind it. My wife's behind it. Everybody's behind it as a community, and we're going to make it work.
Tony Taylor says it's hoped the centre will reduce petty crime in Kaikohe and surrounding areas. It's 5:04. To sport, young American golfer Justin Thomas has bagged his first major title with a come-from-behind victory at the PGA Championship in North Carolina. The 24-year-old started the final round 2 shots off the pace, but stormed home with a 3-under par 68 to take the last major of the year. New Zealand's Ryan Fox, in his first US major, started tied for 12th but drifted back to 6 over and 54th place. But the Aucklander was philosophical about his finish.
Probably could have got away with shooting, 2 or 3 over. I dropped 3 shots in the last 2 holes as well, which doesn't help. But had a afternoon tea time on the Sunday of a major, which was still a pretty cool thing to have.
Ryan Fox. Two-time Olympic medalist Nick Willis says his 8th in the World Athletics Champs 1500 metres has further encouraged him to contest the 1500-5000 double at next year's Commonwealth Games. Kenya's Elijah Mangangoi took gold, while fellow Kenyan Asbel Kiprop, who'd been chasing a 4th straight World 1500 title, finished 9th. Willis says he was pleased with his race given his injury-plagued build-up.
It makes me really excited to know that off of very limited training, let's face it, it's 8 to 10 weeks I've been able to put in, that I can still get 8th in the world. And with the Commonwealth Games, half of those guys won't be there, and the Commonwealth schedule seems to make the 5K 15 double a possibility.
Nick Willis, that's the news.
Racial intolerance.
You saw people standing there with the flat palm salute saying "Hail Trump." This was quite common.
Dairy intolerance.
I think the culture of the army is the right one that is going to help with these kids. And if you think the culture of the army is just press-ups, then you misunderstand them.
And zero tolerance.
They felt really terrible about 30 to 60 minutes after drinking, and they had different types of symptoms. So they had a lot of bloating and distension, so their stomachs felt really, really full.
Guyan Aspinall and Susie Ferguson, Morning Report, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, the government's action plan to tackle the threat of antimicrobial resistance. Will it be effective? And after 10, author and bibliophile Stuart Kells on the magic of libraries. Along with his new book, The Library, a catalogue of wonders. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Manawatu, including Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Showers, some heavy and possibly thundery with hail, easing tomorrow morning and clearing Bay of Plenty. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay mainly fine, but a few showers spreading off the ranges today. Horowhenua, Kapiti, Wellington, Wairarapa, Marlborough, Nelson and Buller. Occasional rain or showers, heavy at times with possible thunderstorms. Becoming mostly fine tomorrow, but showers remaining about Buller. Westland and Fiordland fine at first, rain developing tomorrow evening. Canterbury, rain, heavy at times with snow above 400 metres, easing tonight and clearing tomorrow. North Otago, Dunedin, Clutha and Stewart Island, mostly cloudy today with a few showers, fine tomorrow. Central Otago and mainland Southland, mainly fine. And for the Chatham Islands, occasional rain today and a few showers tomorrow. It's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten. Coming up on the program tonight, the pay equity settlement gave pay rises to workers in aged and residential care, but not in mental health community care. As mental health providers try to stem the loss of workers who can get a 20% pay rise simply by moving to aged care, the Ministry of Health has told DHBs in this document we have that paying those providers more money would be, and I quote, unlawful. In fact, they even put it in capital letters. That's a Checkpoint exclusive. It's coming up. We'll put the document online once we've run this story. But we begin with Australia's Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce. He is, in the words of the ABC, under a long white cloud tonight. He's just the latest politician to potentially fall foul of the country's tough dual citizenship laws. After receiving advice, he may be a New Zealand citizen by descent. Mr Joyce is the leader of the National Party, the junior partner, of course, in the centre-right Liberal National Coalition government that has just a single seat majority in Parliament. Under the Australian Constitution, people with dual citizenship cannot stand for federal election. And it seems it was the New Zealand Labour Party which played a key role in bringing that to Mr Joyce's attention. We begin, before we go live to Canberra, with our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The Minister of Internal Affairs, Peter Dunn, says his department started looking into the possibility Barnaby Joyce was a New Zealand citizen last week, and once that was confirmed, passed it on to Australia via the High Commission in Canberra. He says Mr Joyce's father was a New Zealand citizen, and he passed citizenship on to his son.
It's automatically passed on. I don't know whether he knew or not. He says he didn't know. He says he was under the belief that his father had renounced the New Zealand citizenship. But the fact is it's all irrelevant. If he was eligible to receive the citizenship at the time, under our legislation, he does, regardless of his subsequent circumstances.
Barnaby Joyce addressed the Australian Parliament this morning, saying he was alerted to the situation by New Zealand authorities.
Last Thursday afternoon, the New Zealand High Commission contacted me to advise that, on the basis of preliminary advice from their Department of Internal Affairs, which had received inquiries from the New Zealand Labour Party, they considered that I may be a citizen by descent of New Zealand.
Mr Joyce says he was shocked when he got the information.
Neither I nor my parents have ever had any reason to believe that I may be a citizen of any other country. I was born in Australia in 1967 to an Australian mother. I think I am fifth generation. My father, who was born in New Zealand, came to Australia in 1947 as a British subject. In fact, we were all British subjects at that time.
Peter Dunn says the law in Australia is clear.
You cannot be a citizen of another country at the time that you are elected to Parliament in Australia. It doesn't say knowingly or unknowingly. It doesn't say whether you wanted to be or not. It just simply says you cannot be. This is a matter for Australia, not New Zealand, but if you like, the protests that people were unaware that they were, or that they didn't mean to be, or they didn't think they were, under the Australian Constitution, that is absolute.
But Mr Joyce says, based on the legal advice the government's had from the Solicitor-General, he's confident he won't be disqualified from parliamentary service, but wants the High Court to make a final ruling.
To provide clarification to this very important area of the law, for this and future parliaments, I have asked the government to refer the matter in accordance with Section 376 of the Commonwealth Electoral Act to the High Court. Given the strength of the legal advice the government has received, the Prime Minister has asked that I remain Deputy Prime Minister and continue my ministerial duties.
Peter Dunn says he understands Mr Joyce has already filed papers to renounce his New Zealand citizenship, but that won't have any bearing on his eligibility for Parliament. Mr Dunn says the crucial point is that he was a New Zealand citizen at the time he was appointed to Parliament. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
Let's go live now to Canberra, where we're very kindly joined by ABC political reporter Jane Norman. Jane, I don't know whether to laugh or cry. This is kind of bonkers, isn't it? And
it is.
In the context of the Liberal National Coalition having a one-seat majority, it's almost absurd.
Yeah, this has really raised the stakes this afternoon. As your listeners are probably aware, over the past couple of months, we have been kind of engulfed in this weird constitutional conundrum here in Australia, because this pesky Section 44, which effectively bans any MPs who may be dual citizens from sitting in Parliament. Now, the idea of that originally was so that a person's allegiance couldn't be tied. You know, you can only have allegiance to Australia to sit in the Australian Parliament. But there have been this is now the fifth case in this Parliament which has sort of raised questions about an MP's dual citizen, and in all five cases, none of the MPs knew they were dual citizens at the time. Now, in some of the cases, they're pretty clear-cut because those MPs were actually born in another country, so perhaps they would at least have reason to go back and check. But in Barnaby Joyce's case, as is the case with his colleague Matt Canavan, a national senator, both of them have had a country's citizenship unwittingly conferred on them. And so if you look at the constitutional section sort of in black and white, it looks like they've breached it, but then that issue of like citizenship by descent hasn't actually been tested by the High Court, but it will be very, very soon.
So what happens now? So this is going to the High Court?
It certainly will. So Barnaby Joyce made the sort of shock revelation this morning that he is in fact referring his own case to the High Court. So Parliament has now sort of done the formalities, and that will now happen. So the High Court will now, basically decide whether he has in fact breached this section of the Constitution, Section 44, and if so, it'll rule him, ineligible to stand and disqualify him from Parliament. But he reckons he's got some pretty strong legal advice that because this citizenship had been sort of unwittingly conferred on him, that he's on quite strong legal grounds, but I don't think any constitutional experts would have quite the same confidence, given that the High Court has never ruled on such a case like this before.
It's absolutely fascinating. I can hear lovely noise in the background. Is everyone?
Question time still going on here, so yeah, it's a pretty rowdy office.
Yeah, well, it's set everyone off, obviously. So this lovely phrase, unwittingly conferred. We unwittingly confer you a New Zealander, Barnaby Joyce. What will Malcolm Turnbull doing? What he must be just sitting there very dry in the mouth, is he?
Well, I mean, Malcolm Turnbull was one of the biggest critics of a couple of weeks or months ago when two Greens senators revealed that they were, in fact, dual citizens at the time of election. They both resigned at the very point that they found out because they said that, they're not eligible to stand. So their cases have also gone to the High Court, but they kind of resigned before any sort of outcome. And at the time, Malcolm Turnbull was very critical, saying that, they should have done their due diligence. You've got to tick a box when you sit for Parliament saying that you have, in fact, complied with Section 44. So in this case, perhaps the old phrase of people in glass houses shouldn't be throwing stones is pretty relevant. But Malcolm Turnbull has just told Parliament that he too believes that Barnaby Joyce is safe. He thinks the High Court will find that he's eligible to stand. Very confident, he said, in the Solicitor General's advice. But, like I say, it'll all be up to the High Court to ultimately decide this one.
Jane Norman joining us live from Canberra. Thank you very much, Jane, as the ABC political reporter. What an absolutely fascinating story. Obviously, we will keep an eye, along with everyone in Australia, of course, on what happens in the High Court as Barnaby Joyce sets out to get a ruling in his favour. It's coming up to 16 minutes past 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. Thank you for being with us. The government has today announced how it will spend what it's calling a $100 million social investment fund for mental health. You will have heard details from our health reporter Karen Brown in the 5 o'clock news. While the extra funding was known, some details have been released on where it will go, including new initiatives around prevention and early intervention. But it doesn't appear that any of the money will be used to increase the pay of workers in community mental health care. And in a high-level document leaked to Checkpoint, we'll put it online shortly, the Ministry of Health is warning DHBs against doing exactly that. Sent to all District Health Board Chief Executives on the 7th of July, the Ministry describes increased funding for mental health providers struggling to retain their staff after the pay equity settlement as unlawful. Now, since the pay equity settlement saw increases for workers in aged and residential support care, but not for workers in mental health support, the mental health sector has been losing existing workers and struggling to attract new ones. One DHB told Checkpoint there's an impending catastrophe in the mental health sector if workers can't be retained. But the Health Ministry document, obtained exclusively by Checkpoint, seeks confirmation that DHBs do not intend to provide increased funding to providers and that they'll cease if any initial payments have been made. The Ministry wouldn't talk to us, but a union representing some mental health care workers says the Ministry's letter is outrageous.
I'm totally shocked at that. I just cannot understand why the MOH would do that.
That's Kerry Davies, Assistant National Secretary of the PSA. Now, the settlement itself was announced by Bill English in April.
Cabinet today agreed to a $2 billion pay equity package to be delivered over the next 5 years to 55,000 care and support workers employed across the aged and residential care sector.
But not community mental health support workers, who often do similar work to their colleagues in aged and residential care. Previously, the sector had a kind of low-wage parity, but since the settlement, the difference has become pronounced.
At the moment, mental health support workers generally earn between $16 and $19 an hour.
So $16 to $19 an hour for mental health support workers, while the basic rate for care and support workers in aged and residential care
is from $19 to $23.50 an hour.
That's an average of 20% more, and that's so financially significant, it's beginning to hurt community organisations providing mental health and addiction care.
They're losing staff at a time when we need mental health to be as strong, and addictions to be as strong as we possibly can.
That's Marion Blake, CEO of Platform Trust, a national network of community organisations involved in mental health and addiction services. The pay gap, she says, is beginning to have a serious impact.
So not only are people leaving the mental health services or have indicated that they will be leaving, it's also becoming increasingly difficult to recruit people because people can be paid a higher wage, sometimes as much as $6 an hour difference by going to work in the disability services.
The response? Well, an internal email from the Ministry of Health to the country's DHBs, leaked to Checkpoint, makes it clear that, and this is a verbatim quote,
some district health boards are proposing to fund their contracted providers additional amounts to enable them to pay their mental health workers for providing mental health services at the minimum wage rates of care and support services.
In short, to stop mental health workers from leaving for better pay in aged care, DHBs are proposing to pay their community mental health providers more. The Health Ministry's response to this, in an email sent to all the country's DHBs, is to, quote,
seek your confirmation that you do not intend to provide such funding or will cease it if an initial payment has been made.
That email, leaked to Checkpoint, calls an increased payment unlawful in capital letters and warns of, quote, legal and associated risks with making such payments. Later it says any payments already made need now to, quote, cease. Why? And what are the DHBs and community mental health providers meant to do to retain their workers? The ministry declined to be interviewed despite repeated requests and despite the fact it's their document we're working from, a document they sent to the CEOs of all 20 DHBs. I asked the minister what he made of it.
Look, I'd have to see the document and understand the context of it.
So the ministry sent out the document a month ago and the minister doesn't know about it. Which brings us back to the reaction from the PSA when we told them about the document earlier this afternoon.
I'm totally shocked at that. I just cannot understand why the MOH would do that, why they would put a limit on what DHBs can fund and also what NGOs can actually pay mental health support workers.
The PSA and E2 have filed a claim with the Employment Relations Authority to effectively get mental health workers into the settlement, pay equity settlement they were excluded from. But in the meantime, the community mental health sector is struggling to keep workers and struggling even more to hire new ones.
Yes, we're getting reports from our members that they are moving into other jobs within the care and support workforce and leaving mental health support services. And that's very difficult because people are very committed to mental health support services, but they're also committed to supporting their families, and they need decent wages to be able to do that.
That's the PSA's Kerry Davies. Marion Blake, who represents many of the employers, emphatically agrees.
It means that, organisations who have been struggling, John, over the years they've been struggling, and this is just adding more to it. And I can see organisations closing down. So it's a mess.
It's Marion Blake. What does the Ministry of Health say? Well, once again, they declined to be interviewed, but they did send us a short statement. It says, while the Ministry has appreciated well-intentioned and equitable consideration by some DHBs, it was necessary to make it clear that all funding paid to DHBs through the Ministry had been specifically appropriated by Parliament for a purpose. While it was clear that no pay equity funds could be used for mental health workers, nor could general funds be used for the purpose of a top-up to contracted providers for their mental health workers. Additionally, since the legislation came into force, a claim has been lodged by E2 and the PSA seeking pay parity for mental health workers. That's the Ministry's statement. We will put the Ministry's letter to the DHB up online. The first words are unlawful payment in capital letters. It's 23 minutes past 5 coming up on the program. An ugly and violent weekend comes to an end in Charlottesville, Virginia. And President Donald Trump's response is seriously under fire. Plus, international tourists only, please. The owners of a Bay of Plenty hostel introduce a $50 bond for New Zealanders. Don't forget, of course, you can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, and our email address is checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Let's head to Canterbury and surrounds today, where rainfall, heavy rain in some places, has flooded fields and closed roads and schools right across the region. In the Selwyn district, the townships of Hororata and Leeston have been among the worst affected, with the council keeping a wary eye on rising river levels. Our reporter Katie Gossett is in Leeston, where torrential rain is turning streets into waterways. Katie, it seems that you're standing in a river almost, with what looks like a school behind you. Can you tell us the latest?
Well, I certainly can. I would say I'm about ankle deep in water here. It's probably getting up to calf deep over there, but I'm not really game to try it. But as you observe, this school right here behind me was closed a bit earlier today. Parents came and collected their children earlier because I believe the word moat was used by the principal. And as you can see behind me here, there is a substantial amount of water, and children actually had to be carried out through a back gate to get out. having said that, there are still some children inside because they're on a school holiday program, and they stuck their heads out before and waved and laughed at me through the window. So I may have added a touch of brightness to their day, perhaps, by being out here. But look, elsewhere around the district here, the fire service has been helping locals with sandbagging, so there has been quite a substantial amount of flooding. As we drove into Leeston this afternoon, we saw that some fields were very deep in water, a good half a metre. There was talk earlier in the day that the army was on standby, and that was correct, although it turned out that the fire service were able to help all the people who needed sandbagging. So the Mayor, Sam Broughton, has told me that, as far as he knows, some garages are flooded, although no homes have been badly flooded. So in terms of the township itself, things aren't too serious. Well, they are serious for individuals, but homes themselves not yet flooded.
Katie, it doesn't look like it's raining there at the moment. Is there any sense of what sort of weather is ahead and how high the waters are expected to rise?
We don't know exactly how high the water will rise. Certainly the rain is expected to ease and then clear tomorrow. But at this stage, the concern, as you say, is the water levels in the rivers. So here I'm talking about the tributaries and the fords that flow into the Selwyn River. And so what happens there is, of course, they all end up in the Selwyn River and they head down towards the Selwyn Huts, which is a small settlement to the eastern end of the river. Now, of course, that did see some flooding last month. So naturally, there's a concern that there might be a repeat of that. Now, the Mayor, Sam Broughton, tells me that, in fact, that seems unlikely at this point. They're keeping an eye, as you said yourself in the introduction, on what's coming up in the forecast and also on those river levels. And at this stage, he says that if the river levels stay where they are, it is unlikely that it would cause any problems or the Selwyn River would break their banks. And in fact, we talked to somebody earlier in Coes Ford, which is one of the fords flowing into the river, and he said that the river levels are only at about a quarter of what they were last month when that happened. So that's a good sign for the people living in the Selwyn Huts.
Katie Gossett live from Leeston. Thank you so much, Katie. You would have heard Katie say that there doesn't seem to be flooding in homes or businesses. If you are the exception to that, please do text us on 2101 and we will give you a call. It's 27 minutes past 5. The owners of a Bay of Plenty Hostel have introduced a $50 bond for all New Zealanders following 16 major incidents on the premises this year alone. The Mount backpackers say all guests not travelling on international payments will be expected to pay the fee after a raft of unacceptable behaviour by New Zealanders. And the owners say homelessness is a major contributor. Our Māori Issues correspondent, Mihi Narangi Forbes, reports.
Welcome to the Bay of Plenty, the sunniest region in the North Island, and a place...
Mount Maunganui, renowned for being a holiday paradise and home to one of New Zealand's best beaches. But if you're a New Zealander wanting a cheap place to stay, you might be out of luck. Jo Veal says since she purchased the Mount Backpackers earlier this year and following 16 major incidents, she's not keen on hosting New Zealanders.
Assault on guests, vandalism, fighting, verbal abuse, swearing at staff, vomiting, faeces smeared in the bathrooms, people talking about murdering other people, dealing drugs, trying to pay for accommodation with stolen product, aggressive and drunken behaviour. We had 16 of those. One non-Kiwi was involved.
The cheapest room in a shared dorm in the centre of Mount Maunganui is $28 a night. Ms Veal says she's also asked WINZ to remove her business from its emergency accommodation list.
We had a mental health patient who checked in and that was disastrous.
So you're kind of being lumped with social services really in your community.
That's right, and my employees aren't trained in any kind of way. They're not psychologists. They're not there to police people. People who come and stay in backpackers need to be reasonably independent.
Ms Veal says the incidents have forced her to introduce a $50 bond for anyone without an international passport. And while that sounds like discrimination, local housing provider Tommy Wilson has sympathy for the business.
We know that sort of clientele there is nowhere else for them to go. The holiday parks and the caravans, they've used up all those. We see the same bunch of people going from service to service, agency to agency, and they go further and further down. But they're ones that are very hard to work with me because they've got so many issues. most of them just drug and alcohol issues.
Adding to the accommodation squeeze is the booming kiwifruit industry, and Tommy Wilson is blunt about who is fueling the shortage.
As far as working goes, most of the people I'm looking at orchards where I'm sitting now, they're Indians that are working in big clusters for low rates, and they're pushing out the low level of cheap accommodation, whether it's backpackers or cheap motels or anything else. They've got that pretty covered.
Mr Wilson is the CEO of Te Tuinga Whānau, an organisation which has been housing the homeless for 26 years. He has sympathy for Joe Veal and says organisations dealing with the complex homeless need more funding.
The front line isn't being resourced properly, whether it's drug addiction, counselling, budgeting. You've got to move all that up to the front line.
Mr Wilson, who houses mostly families in the organisation's 8 homes, has helped 35 families, including 60 children in Tauranga, over the past year.
You can't put services around them when they're in front lawns or on a floor in a shed or on a caravan. It's impossible. So there's a really good opportunity to fix this problem up by putting them in a place where you can work with them.
While in his organisation's care, they're taught how to manage renting in the community before being helped into permanent accommodation. Next month, Tauranga will host the International Aims Games, which is expected to attract more than 10,000 competitors. Joe Veal says her backpackers is already full, and Tommy Wilson says he expects locals will be forced to leave emergency motel accommodation to make way for international visitors. Ko te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei ko Mihingarangi Forbes ahau.
Your checkpoint on RNZ. We asked for feedback about flooding in Canterbury. We've just heard from the good people at the Christchurch Transport Operations Centre that State Highway 75, which is Little River to Taitapu, has been closed overnight. The next update expected at 8 a.m. on that road. So if you use 75 to get home from work, don't tonight. You'll have to go round. Coming up on Checkpoint, a successful youth support program on the Kapiti Coast says it could do more for disillusioned young people than a military-style camp. Lots of talk about that on Morning Report this morning. We're looking at some alternatives tonight. And why drones could save people from drowning at Auckland's treacherous West Coast beaches. Nona next with business. But first, Katrina with the headlines.
The government is promising to transform mental health services in order to build resilience in children and young people. It's just released details of 17 initiatives planned under a new social investment approach to mental health. The Ministry of Health has written to DHBs telling them not to pay their mental health workers the same as aged care and support staff. The document leaked to Checkpoint tells chief executives any payment to mental health staff would be a breach of the Public Finance Act. Opposition politicians in Australia are demanding the country's Deputy Prime Minister stand aside until a court rules on his New Zealand citizenship. The Internal Affairs Minister, Peter Dunn, says he understands Barnaby Joyce has started the process of renouncing his citizenship. The Selwyn district southwest of Christchurch has been hit by widespread flooding. 2 schools closed early today, and fire and emergency has been helping locals to sandbag properties. The Anglican Church is considering gifting Christchurch's cathedral to the people of New Zealand. The building has stood derelict since the 2011 earthquakes. Armed police officers are still guarding the scene on the outskirts of Morrinsville, where a man opened fire on the police yesterday. The gunman is still at large. The founder of Kaikohe Safety Patrol says the town's new youth centre offers new hope for local teenagers. Tony Taylor says the attempted break-in by children at a service station in March made the whole town resolve to change things. And 4 leading telecommunications companies have received warning letters from the Commerce Commission over misleading practices. Spark, Vodafone, 2 Degrees and My Republic have all been told they've breached the Fair Trading Act in different ways. And a private Auckland radiation therapy centre has been told to apologise for giving a man significantly more radiation than intended. The Health and Disability Commissioner says Auckland Radiation Oncology breached patient rights. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6 o'clock.
We're hearing from lots of people worried about their New Zealand citizenship. Kate Fitzgerald is saying my great-grandfather came from Australia in 1863. and settled here. Does that mean I'm an Australian citizen? It does, Kate, and we shouldn't really have read your email out. I'm Radio New Zealand. Nona Peltier, what are you doing here? You're a Canadian, aren't you?
I am a Kiwi. I've got the two, so it's okay. I'm safe.
So you're all right here, but you'd be in trouble in Australia,
I
wouldn't
would be. It's okay. I'm not going there. It's fine.
We're delighted to hear it, Nona.
Okay.
What's up? I've got a question to ask you. A number of companies... Oh, yes, that's right. You previewed this on.
Yeah, we had a really busy day, and exceptionally busy, actually. We had Contact Energy, reported a loss, not a loss, but their profit was down.
Yeah.
No, not a loss, sorry. You must make that very clear.
Yeah.
But their profit was down about 10%, which is about what the market was expecting. But the share price still rose, and that's because they've changed their dividend policy. So they're going to pay more of their cash out to shareholders, which is great for shareholders. And the reason they're doing that is because they really don't have any big ticket items to spend on anymore. There's nothing much to buy. So, hey, if you're a Contact shareholder, you're going to get a bigger dividend, and that was reflected in the share price today. Also, Heartland Bank surprised the market on the upside.
100% New Zealand owned Heartland Bank.
Yeah, it is, and they're making money off of all sorts of different kinds of products. One of them is a reverse mortgage, which appeals to baby boomers.
Yeah, it does, because they have equity in their homes but maybe no cash, right?
Right, exactly. So you can borrow against your house, you don't have to make any payments, and the interest cost is added on, and at the end, when you sell or whatever.
Or at the big end,
possibly.
Whatever is owed is collected from your estate, right?
Right, exactly. Or you sell and then you settle up, or what the difference is. So presumably you would have some equity in your home, so you'd have some left, you wouldn't live too long.
So Heartland Bank's doing that sort of stuff, is it?
Yeah. So they were doing very well. They had a big kick up on their profit, 12% rise.
How does the market behave during reporting season? Do the volumes go down? Does it become a bit tentative, or is it just business as usual?
Well, it's an interesting time. I mean, today we had a takeover offer on top of everything else for a company called Opus International, which is an engineering company, and a company out of Canada, WSP. It offered to take over the company, 100% of it. Now, the share price for Opus has been sort of hovering around 99 cents, $1 for quite a while. The company had been underperforming. Well, WSP has offered $1.78 a share, so that rocketed up the share price up 72% today to $1.70 from 99 cents on Friday. It's a big hike up. And anyway, that drove our market up about 0.5%. So you might remember on Friday there was a big downturn.
Yeah, there was.
And now we've gained about half of what we lost on Friday. So we rose by 43 points to 7,762. And our dollar is holding steady. Now, even though with all of what's going on in the region, geopolitical risk, North Korea, the United States, rhetoric, you name it, there's so much out there that the US dollar is sagging a bit, but the New Zealand dollar is holding steady at 73.1 US cents, 92.6 Australian, and 56.2 pence.
Our business reporter, Nona Peltier, thank you. Let's go to Morrinsville now, where locals say the community remains resilient after a gunman opened fire on police early yesterday morning, leaving some residents on edge, understandably. About 30 police officers, including some in the Armed Defender Squad, are still looking for the missing gunman and are appealing for any information. Jessie Chang is in Morrinsville.
It was business as usual in the small town, but the shooting early yesterday morning has been weighing on the minds of locals. They hope the missing gunman, who led police on a car chase before shooting at officers with a military-style firearm, is caught soon.
And I know that there's a few people that live out in the country that are still, I think, a bit worried about what could happen. But personally, I'm in town. The cops, they're doing a really good job. We've had no problems. Hopefully the guy's just gone. Like, he wouldn't be hanging around.
I just live just out of town a bit, but it must be scary for like the people around, like the close area.
I just thought it was serious because I could hear the helicopter. But the community will just take it on the chin, like they always do.
The Matamata Piako Mayor, Jan Barnes, says the weekend's events have rocked the community, but she says she's confident the police are doing their best.
I think our community are a little rattled, but I think we're resilient. I think we can carry on our day and we can be looking out for each other, particularly our neighbours. It's so out of the normal. I mean, you don't behave like this with firearms. So we need to get that person some help.
The principal of Morrinsville College, John Inga, says the school is running normally. He doesn't think the gunman is likely to make a reappearance in the town.
Most of us would be thinking that that person's either scarpered well out of town
or is laying very low in town if in fact someone is harbouring this person. But we've got confidence in the local police. They've been very, very helpful with us for many, many years, and I'm sure they'll be telling us if there are any dangers.
John Inga says although there are still people who are very concerned with the gunman at large, he says the local community is resilient. Just a few roads away, the principal of Morrinsville Primary School, Shay Noonan, says his students are fine.
Really, there's a little bit of chat at around morning tea time and playtime and stuff like that, maybe in the classrooms, but there's no big deal about it. We're back at school and, the police are doing their job and we're doing ours.
The police have continued to examine the scene today, and the cordon on Kuranui Road between Avenue Road and Scott Road has been in place for much of the day, with armed officers guarding it. The police have been questioning the two other people in the car with the gunman early Sunday morning, a man and a woman aged between 25 to 30 years old. They say anyone with information on the car, a red Holden Commodore with the registration 1AZIF1, should talk to police. In Morrinsville for Checkpoint, Jessie Changaho.
It has been an ugly and violent weekend in Charlottesville, Virginia, of course, and the response from President Donald Trump is being heavily criticised, including from within his own party. One woman was killed and 19 others injured when a man drove a car into a crowd of anti-racist protesters during clashes with white supremacists. A 20-year-old has been charged with murder and a state of emergency remains in place in the city. The president is now under increasing pressure to explicitly condemn the white nationalist, white supremacists and neo-Nazi groups involved. The ABC's Stephanie March is in Charlottesville and has filed this report.
For murder, fighting these people. I'll be in Washington.
After 2 days of tensions, Charlottesville remains a tinderbox. A state of emergency is in place, but clashes continue. Jason Kessler, the white nationalist blogger who organised Friday's demonstration to protest the removal of a Confederate statue, tried to hold a press conference today to condemn law enforcement officers for failing to keep the peace.
The hate that you hear around you, that is the anti-white hate that fueled what happened yesterday. What happened yesterday was the result of the Charlottesville police officers refusing to do their job. They stood down and did not follow through with the agreed upon security arrangements.
Despite police protection, he was overrun by counter-protesters. Earlier, at a church service, Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe called for a moment of silence for Heather Heyer, a 32-year-old woman allegedly mowed down by a white nationalist, and for 2 state troopers who died in a helicopter crash while covering the protests.
Political rhetoric in this country today has breeded bigotry and hatred. 80% of them, I was told, carried firearms, marching up and down our beautiful city with semi-automatic rifles.
Yesterday, Donald Trump condemned the violence on many sides and has been widely criticised for failing to single out white nationalist groups directly. Criticisms growing from within Mr Trump's own party too. Republican Senators Marco Rubio, Lindsey Graham and Cory Gardner say the president needs to go further.
Well, this is not a time for vagaries. This isn't a time for innuendo or to allow room to be read between the lines. This is a time to lay blame on bigotry, to lay blame on white supremacists, on white nationalism and on hatred.
The White House has issued a statement saying the president's condemnation yesterday, of course, includes white supremacists, the KKK, neo-Nazis and all extremist groups. But some want to hear those words from the president's own mouth. The alleged driver of the car that struck Heather Heyer and more than a dozen others is James Alex Fields, a 20-year-old who reportedly has ties to the white nationalist group Vanguard America. CNN commentator Van Jones.
An American citizen was assassinated in broad daylight by a Nazi who the day before had been marching with torches down American streets saying anti-Jewish, anti-black stuff. And then an American, this is not a time to talk about both sides.
Donald Trump's supporters and the conservative TV network Fox News have criticised his detractors for ignoring the president's message of condemnation for all those involved, saying counter-protesters, including members of the anti-fascist group Antifa, carried out violence too.
That was the ABC's Stephanie March, who is in Charlottesville, Virginia. A successful youth support program in Kapiti, struggling to get by, says it could do more for disillusioned young people than a military-style camp if only it had more funding. Now, the National Party wants to send 50 youth criminals each year to a training academy at the Waihuru military camp. Bill English is rejecting calls or descriptions of it as a boot camp, saying the young people sent there will get literacy and numeracy training as part of the program. Looking at all of this, the beginning of our look at it actually is Jacob McSweeney.
Terry Poko is the Kapiti Area Manager for Youth Quest, an organisation helping get young men's lives back on track. It doesn't manage the hardened criminals facing up to 14 years in jail. Its clients are wagging school and beginning to get in trouble with police. When the program started 11 years ago, the manager at the time had a military background and took an authoritative approach in working with the boys. When Terry Poko became manager, he took a softer approach.
We could still get the same result without all the shouting and telling them to sit down, when to sit down, how to sit down, what time to sit down. The better approach was to keep the boys involved, talk to them all the time, keep them aware of what we're doing and what we're doing. So I guess the Army approach was, what are we doing today? Don't worry about it.
Police, schools and parents struggling with misbehaving boys are referred to Youth Quest, where the young men spend 6 weeks in an intensive course. That includes a week in the bush. The program keeps tabs on the boys for the following 12 months, and Terry Poko says there have been some great successes. Just 4 of the 300 boys they've had ended up in jail, and Mr. Poko says one of the boys now has a roofing business and is on the verge of buying a house. The program just missed out on $50,000 in contestable funding from the Ministry of Youth Development, and Mr. Poko says its survival is up in the air.
If it doesn't come through, we're good till October. If it does come through, then we're good till January next year. But it's been like that for a while. If money was poured into our program, it'll go a long way to saving the country money and also helping more young men.
One of Youth Quest's success stories is 17-year-old Piripi Willis, who stopped attending school and had begun dabbling in drugs and alcohol.
Bush was tough. Classroom phase, everything was pretty hard. Being out bush was pretty hard. No showers, just listening, bridges, not allowed to swear, all sorts.
And what happened when you graduated?
Slowly turned my life around, went back into school, a couple more years.
His brother, Adrian Willis, is passionate about the program and has been tutoring boys like his brother for nearly 3 years. He says the military approach is very unlikely to work.
Some of these boys that are at risk have been yelled at all their lives, and that obviously hasn't changed them. Some people just need somebody who's there for them to look after them, and that's the approach that we currently do, and that's what's working for us. I don't know about the whole authoritative stuff or the yelling in there. I wouldn't react well to it.
The RSA, however, is giving its backing to the National Party's proposal. Its president, BJ Clark, says he's overseen the development of hundreds of young people in military-style courses and previous roles in the Army.
It gives you some good training. It's the others that are around you. It's the competitiveness of you want to finish ahead of the other guy. You don't want to be seen to be the guy at the back. Surely it's better than just casting these people aside. It's another thing to try to see if that we can assist these young people. Because at the moment, all we're doing is allowing them to wander around the streets and create havoc.
Mr. Clark warns the military is already stretched thin, and if the government wants the program to work, it must be properly funded. For Checkpoint, Court Jacob McSweeney, Aho.
We want to know what other party leaders make of national so-called boot camp plans, as promoted by Bill English, so we did a ring around. Even their own support partners described it as reminiscent of a bygone era. We begin with Māori Party co-leader Marama Fox.
I was a little bit gobsmacked, if I'm honest. I thought this just is harking back to the 70s and 80s where we tried to whip children into shape. It goes back to an bygone era of colonialism where we whipped our children into submission and told them that they should be seen and not heard, that they should toe the line. Now, we don't believe that their policies are beneficial to reducing recidivism, and you only need to look at the failure of boot camps that have been tried in the past. So it's not true that they haven't been tried. They have been tried. And if you look at Whakapakiri, where those young people were systematically abused on an island in a boot camp that they could not escape from. It was horrendous and further traumatised and criminalised those young people.
David Seymour, the leader of ACT New Zealand. The ACT Party will fill the void that is left by National's tired policy. If you want to be stronger on youth crime, you've got to do better through education. And the most credible party on that right now is ACT. ACT's policy of having prisoners released early if they learn to read in prison is a public policy revolution of substance that has earned the praise of Labour, National, the Howard League and the Sensible Sentencing Trust. That's the kind of innovation that ACT brings to this election.
It's Winston Peters here from New Zealand First. Remember, Paula Bennett and before that Judith Collins were going around the country saying crime is falling. Crime is falling. We knew it wasn't true. Now, close to the election, they're saying we've got a problem and they're going to address it. When they had a proposal before them in the form of a New Zealand First bill to take young people early out of secondary school when they weren't shaping up and use the army to educate and retrain them, they opposed it. Then here, 6 weeks out from election, panicking in the polls, they come up with a boot camp idea with no clear idea what it means, and having not done anything in the last few years to address the issue of youth crime. In fact, they've been spending almost 9 years telling us that youth crime and crime generally is going down. So I think voters can work out what's going on here.
Jacinda Ardern, Leader of the Opposition, we've got to do what works. Evidence strongly shows that boot camps don't make a difference. They don't stop young people offending. They don't keep our communities any safer. They're not a good investment. If we do have young people who have entered into the criminal justice system, there are programs that we know make a difference. One of them used to be something called Te Hurihanga. It was intensive. It works with an offender's family and the young person, both before they went into program and after, and it placed them in employment. That's the kind of program we'd like to see more focus on.
Jacinda Ardern ending that ring around, which was done by our producer Bridget Burke. Green Party leader James Shaw wasn't available. He was busy. And United Future's Peter Dunn refused to talk on tape, but texted his opposition to the idea. We would have loved to talk to Peter Dunn about how he's going in his electorate as the election approaches, but I don't think he was available for that either. Peter, if you're listening, we'd love to have a chat to you about Ohariu. Call us. Right, it is coming up to 8 minutes to 6. It's a project Kaikohe has been talking about for years, having a youth space. But the powers that be were finally galvanised into action after local children were videoed in March trying to bust into an iwi-owned service station in the town. Our Northland reporter, Lois Williams, was at the opening of the youth space today.
There was a happy buzz on Kaikohe's main street this morning and no naughty boys in sight as a long queue of guests filed into what used to be the town's Video Easy shop. It's been transformed into a clean, carpeted, empty space, waiting for the town's young people to decide how they want to fill it. So far, a couple of pool tables have been donated. But the centre will be staffed by Kaikohe's Te Kotahitanga I Mahi Kaha Trust, and its manager, Aroha Tahiri, says it'll offer not just recreation, but food, nurture and mentoring for young people aged between 12 and 24.
This is another milestone of great things that can happen in Kaikohe for Ngāpuhi Tai Tamariki.
It's not going to be just a place where you go to play pool or ping pong, though, is it? What's on offer here? What's going to be on offer?
Whilst I would like to say what is on offer, what I can say is at this point in time it is going to be a blank canvas. We have some ideas that we want to work with our Tai Tamariki with, but it's about them designing a space that will keep them engaged.
The youth space has been funded by the Trust, the Ngāpuhi Rūranga, which kicked in $100,000, and central government, which has matched the local contributions. All up, $350,000 worth of investment in a town where there are not a lot of facilities just for youth, apart from the skate park. Mana leader Hone Harawira says it's a vote of confidence in young people and a far cry from the government's latest youth initiative to put difficult young offenders into military training.
This is Ngāpuhi trying to feed the young people. There's nothing at all about what National wants to do, which is smack young people on the head. So it's on another planet entirely. This is the tribe investing in its own future.
Labour's Deputy Leader Te Tai Tōkiro candidate Kelvin Davis says the project's long overdue.
We've seen the troubles that Kaikohe has had recently with wayward youth, and so this is a place where they'll be able to come, where they'll receive everything, I believe, from food, mentoring, emotional support, all those things that are really essential for young people who are developing and growing.
And Tony Taylor, who runs the local Community Safety Patrol, also has high hopes of the youth centre.
Everybody's been saying they wanted a youth centre. They've got it. We've had several in Kaikohe before, but this one's got a real positive feeling behind it. The locals are behind it. I'm behind it. My wife's behind it. Everybody's behind it as a community, and we're going to make it work.
Kaikohe's young people have chosen the name of their new space, Te Uma o Te Kona, the breast of Te Kona. She was the mother of local hero Hone Heke, who clutched him to her bosom and hid him safely in a tree while battle raged around them. And as the Ngāpuhi Runanga Chief Executive Tony Darling told teenagers in the audience, this will be their place of safety.
The door's open. There's no need to break it down. There's no need to force your way in. Come. 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 And we'll welcome you with open arms with our staff pupils here. The doors are open. There's no need to break it.
The Kaikohe Youth Space will be open after school hours and in the holidays. In Kaikohe for Checkpoint, Lois Williams.
Beautiful singing in their package from the students of Te Kura Kaupapa o Kaikohe. Could drones soon save people from drowning at Auckland's treacherous west coast beaches? Our reporter Eva Corlett went to Muriwai to find out.
Muriwai Beach is part of a rugged coastline of notoriously dangerous beaches. Its raging surf and aggressive rips swallow swimmers and surfers every year. But Muriwai's unusual black sand, native bush and proximity to the city attracts thousands of locals and tourists to its shores. The Muriwai Volunteer Lifeguard Service rescues around 100 of them a summer. Sometimes it doesn't always succeed. Its former president and now head of drones, Tim Jago, says the loss of a kayaker 2 summers ago was the impetus to seek new tools.
We were searching for him and then ultimately searching for his body, and even though the surf conditions weren't all that challenging, we just couldn't find him. And it was only when the Westpac Rescue helicopter arrived 45 minutes later and they provided that eye in the sky sort of capability for us.
Mr Jago says a helicopter can take 17 minutes to get to Muriwai, so a drone could be the difference between someone drowning and surviving.
We're sort of 2 to 3 minutes from ripping open the backpack that these things will be stored in to having them airborne and sending pictures back to us.
Mr Jago says the drones will cost around $5,000 each and just a few cents per hour to run, compared with thousands of dollars an hour for a helicopter. He says the drones, which will be run by specially trained staff, will also cut risk for the lifeguards.
Police will send dogs in when they've got a really dangerous situation first, or they'll send a robot in if it's a potential bomb situation or something like that. We're rapidly arriving at the situation where we can send the drones into isolated or dangerous parts of our coastline to conduct the searches without having to put lifeguards in there.
Mr Jago says the West Coast's unforgiving conditions may present challenges in flying and maintaining the drones. But the technology is developing rapidly, including some that will land in the water and act as a floating device. Planning for the pilot project has been rigorous, and for those worried about privacy issues, all footage will be wiped within days.
2 words: safe and legal. And so that drives all our standard operating procedures, so we don't fly over people unnecessarily, just in case we have equipment failure and plunges out of the sky. We don't do anything that could alarm or distress people.
The head lifeguard at the club, Oliver Tyack, says drones will make their jobs easier, especially during the glaring evening sunstrike. It will also provide an opportunity for others wanting to be involved in rescue.
For the lifeguards who sort of are getting on a bit, don't want to get into the water, don't want to get into the boats, for the lifeguards' parents, gives them something that they can sort of add to the club, sort of different ways for them to contribute. So I think it's going to be beneficial for sort of everyone.
A number of the local beachgoers agreed.
People don't actually realise how rough it gets, how dangerous it is. Yeah.
And so would you feel safer having something like that technology at the club?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely, especially to go past out the breakers and stuff, and the surfers as well, will be good.
I don't see a problem with it as long as they're open to feedback from people who are using the beach, and if there's any issues that they can sort of have open dialogue about it. I think it's good. We've got to embrace the technology and see what it can do for us.
If it's going to help save lives, go for it.
Can you foresee any issues?
People are worried about, privacy and whatever they're doing being kept or stored or whatever, but, for the greater good, if they save people out here, I don't see as it's an issue, really.
The club hopes to roll out the project to 10 northern clubs over the next year and a half at a total cost of $150,000. It will rely on donations and sponsorship to see the project through. A murawai mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Eva Corlett tēnei.
And pictures by Claire Easton Farrelly. It's coming up to 6 o'clock.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The union representing mental health workers says it's outrageous officials are telling district health boards not to pay mental health workers the same as aged care workers. The letter sent last month is a blow to those who were left out of the recent settlement, boosting the wages of 55,000 aged care and disability workers. The document leaked to Checkpoint tells DHB chief executives that any extra payment to mental health staff would be a breach of the Public Finance Act. The Public Service Association's Assistant National Secretary, Kerry Davies, admits the letter's content has taken her by surprise.
I'm totally shocked at that. I just cannot understand why the MOH would do that.
Kerry Davies. Meanwhile, the government is promising to transform mental health services in order to build resilience in children and young people. It's released details of 17 initiatives planned under a new social investment approach to mental health. They include e-therapy for young people, follow-up support for those who attempt suicide, a pilot for mental health services in schools, and helping people keep their tenancies while dealing with mental illness. The Health Minister, Jonathan Coleman, says it's not just about throwing money at the problem.
The demand has really ramped up, obviously way above population growth, but the answer to actually dealing with mental illness is not necessarily just more money. More money helps, but it's actually investing the type of programs in this package which will bend back that curve of demand over time.
The Health Minister, Jonathan Coleman. Opposition politicians in Australia are demanding the country's Deputy Prime Minister stand aside until the High Court rules on his citizenship. Barnaby Joyce has revealed he may be a dual citizen because his father was born in New Zealand. Under the Australian Constitution, anyone with dual citizenship cannot stand for federal election. Another government minister, Matt Canavan, has resigned while his status is sorted. A Labour frontbencher, Anthony Albanese, wants to know why Mr Joyce isn't doing the same.
That's really up to Barnaby Joyce to explain what distinction the government is clearly drawing between Barnaby Joyce's circumstances and Matt Canavan's circumstances. Both of them have been referred to the High Court.
Anthony Albanese. New Zealand's Internal Affairs Minister Peter Dunn says that whatever the court rules, Mr Joyce was clearly a New Zealand citizen at the time of his election. Support groups say they're seeing a rise in the number of Indian students who have failed to gain residency despite spending tens of thousands of dollars on courses and jobs. The Migrant Workers and Indian Workers Associations say a growing number of students are depressed, anxious and even suicidal because their attempt to live in New Zealand has failed. They say it's not unusual for students and their families to borrow $60,000 or $70,000 to pay for course fees and secure jobs with exploitative employers. The association says the big debts make the students vulnerable and some end up working in slave-like conditions. They say the students face lifelong shame if they return home after spending so much time and money in New Zealand. Armed police officers are still guarding the scene on the outskirts of Morrinsville, where a man opened fire on the police yesterday. The gunman is still at large and the police want anyone with information to come forward. Jessie Chang reports.
The shot-up police car has been removed from Kuranui Road, but the red Holden Commodore the gunman abandoned still lies there, riddled with bullet holes. Yellow markers line the middle of the road where the shooting happened, and a cordon remains in place while investigators continue their scene examination. In the town itself, people are saying they think the worst is most likely over. They don't think the gunman is someone local, nor do they think he'll reappear in their town anytime soon. In Morrinsville, Jessie Chang TNA.
Fewer than half the claims on quake-damaged homes in the Upper South Island have been settled so far, even though more than 60% have been assessed. The latest Insurance Council figures show the total value of the 43,000 claims lodged since last November's Kaikohe earthquake is now nearly $2 billion, most of them for commercial property. The Council's Chief Executive, Tim Grafton, says it's confident the majority of people will have received settlement offers by the end of this year. Ward resident Candy Callaghan, who one of the many in Marlborough whose home was severely damaged, says she's still waiting for resolution, but there are signs it might be close. It's 6:05. In sport, world number 14 Justin Thomas has broken into golf's big time by winning his first major title. The 24-year-old American surged home with a 3-under par 68 to secure the PGA Championship by 2 shots earlier today. Meanwhile, Auckland golfer Ryan Fox is taking a lot of confidence from his performance on the tough North Carolina course. Fox finished 6 over, tied for 54th in his first major on US soil. He had been as high as 8th after his second round 66.
It's just one of those golf courses that gives you nothing, and I got nothing all day. You know, I had a couple of good shots and didn't take advantage of them, and had a couple of shots that I didn't think were that bad. They got punished really, really badly.
Ryan Fox. Wellington's Quentin Roux has set a new national 50-kilometre walk record at the World Athletic Championships in London. He finished 12th in a time of 3 hours, 46 minutes and 29 seconds, shaving more than a minute and a half off the record set by Craig Barrett 16 years ago. And 2-time Olympic medalist Nick Willis says he's satisfied with his 8th placing in this morning's 1,500 metres final, given he had just a couple of months build-up. Willis says shin splints prevented him from training for a large part of the year, and he's proud he could still achieve the 8th fastest time at the World Champs. That's the news.
Tonight on Night's hunting for the dementia gene with the Canadian-based researcher and Ryman Prize winner Peter St George Hislop. Problem is, once you've found it, what do you do then? And what do you do if it's found in you? We have a window on the world of Venezuela. Now the oil money's running out, and Stella McQueen celebrates the torrent fish, something of a whitewater specialist. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met surface weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Manawatu, including Bay of Plenty and the central high country. Showers, some heavy and possibly thundery with hail, easing tomorrow morning and clearing Bay of Plenty. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay mainly fine, but a few showers spreading off the ranges this evening. Horowhenua, Kapiti, Wellington, Wairarapa, Marlborough, Nelson and Buller. Occasional rain or showers, heavy at times with possible thunderstorms, becoming mostly fine tomorrow, but showers remaining about Buller. Westland and Fiordland mainly fine, however cloud increasing tomorrow and rain developing in the evening. Canterbury, rain with snow above 400 metres, easing tonight and clearing tomorrow. North Otago, Dunedin, Clutha and Stewart Island, mostly cloudy this evening with a few showers, mainly fine tomorrow. Central Otago and mainland Southland, mainly fine, and the Chatham Islands, occasional rain easing to a few showers early tomorrow. It's coming up to 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten. We had, after 5 o'clock, this document that was sent out from the Ministry of Health to District Health Board CEOs, all 20 of them throughout New Zealand, saying unlawful payment of pay equity minimum hourly rates to mental health workers. In other words, if you work in aged care and community residential care, you got the pay equity settlement. If you are a mental health community worker, you didn't. And as a result, there is an exodus of people from mental health to aged care, and it is very hard to get people into mental health community care. We've just put this document up online. It's now the lead story in the news. It is available if you want to read it. Very strong language from the Ministry to the DHBs about not matching pay equity rates for mental health workers. It's now available online. Let's go to Australia, where this is an absolutely fascinating story. Australia's Deputy Prime Minister has become embroiled in the country's dual citizenship saga after it was confirmed he's a New Zealand citizen, but really in the most tenuous kind of way. Australian politicians aren't eligible to be elected to Parliament if they hold dual citizenship, a rule that has forced the recent resignation of 2 senators. Mr Joyce's admission potentially poses a threat to the Conservative government's hold on power because the centre-right coalition government has just a single seat majority in Parliament. This is how Mr Joyce explained his situation when he addressed Parliament earlier today, before Internal Affairs Minister Peter Dunn confirmed that he actually is a New Zealand citizen.
Last Thursday afternoon, the New Zealand High Commission contacted me to advise that, on the basis of preliminary advice from their Department of Internal Affairs, which had received inquiries from the New Zealand Labour Party, they considered that I may be a citizen by descent of New Zealand. Needless to say, I was shocked to receive this information. I've always been an Australian citizen, born in Tamworth, just as my mother and my great-grandmother was born there 100 years earlier. Neither I nor my parents have ever had any reason to believe that I may be a citizen of any other country. I was born in Australia in 1967 to an Australian mother. I think I am fifth generation. My father, who was born in New Zealand, came to Australia in 1947 as a British subject. In fact, we were all British subjects at that time. The concept of New Zealand and Australian citizenship was not created until 1948.
This is just bizarre stuff. So that's Barnaby Joyce speaking to Parliament before a tumultuous day in Australian politics, just for a change. They have a few of them. We're joined now by Fairfax political correspondent Stephanie Peatling, who's joining us live from Canberra. Stephanie, it's lovely to have you back on Checkpoint. Are you there?
Hello there, how are you?
Yeah, good. And this is rude of me, but mildly amused by this. I mean, his old man left New Zealand in 1947, for God's sake. He wasn't born here. He's born in Australia. He goes back dozens of generations, seemingly, on his mother's side. In what way should this imperil his political career?
Well, I think it's all your guys' fault.
No, it's not.
Apparently your citizenship is conferred automatically on people who have one parent who was born in New Zealand, and that is exactly what has happened to Mr Joyce. His father, James, has been...
Wait a sec, hold on, I just want to cut in here. His father was James Joyce.
I know, it's a great name, isn't it?
not the James Joyce, obviously.
Better and better. No, not that. No, not the
right,
famous novelist. No. Although I think he was Irish, so I think
that's right.
Difficulties.
Anyway, so sorry. So his dad is James, which means that he does, as a descendant of a New Zealander, have dual citizenship. Why should this imperil his political career?
Well, because the Australian Constitution says very clearly that people who wish to be elected to Parliament are not allowed to be dual citizens. So even though Mr Joyce's citizenship of New Zealand was never activated or enabled, or whatever verb you want to use, it was just given to him in a kind of passive way, so to speak, he is still barred by our Constitution from potentially being in Parliament. And it's a very serious situation for the government because, as you mentioned in your introduction, they have a one-seat majority in the House of Representatives. So this could potentially be extremely difficult for Malcolm Turnbull and his government.
And as we were hearing earlier in the programme, Malcolm Turnbull made great play over the Greens, the two Green senators, right, who had to stand out by saying, hey, caveat emptor, or whatever the equivalent Latin phrase is, they should have known. And if that's right. So he's sort of somewhat hoist by his own petard. What are the opposition politicians saying here?
Well, the opposition has gone very hardball on this. We've just finished question time a little while ago, and they basically threw the whole usual process out the window and launched into a motion about how the government is now potentially illegitimate, because how are we supposed to say that any vote that's been passed in Parliament over the past year can be taken as legitimate when potentially one of the members of that government might not have supposed to have been there in the first place?
See, so I was chuckling, but actually when you have a one-seat majority and this guy may in fact, and the Constitution's pretty unequivocal about it, that's that. No dual citizenship. He's out. Right. Unless he can win in the High Court, he's a goner. This is actually really serious, isn't it?
It's incredibly serious, and I think the government is our Attorney General is saying that they have very straightforward legal advice that says they believe he will be found to be eligible because of this issue that he was unaware of the citizenship. Now, the Constitution is not clear. Is very clear.
Very clear, yeah.
There's nothing about, you had to have a passport or you had to have, filled in paperwork or anything like that. It just says you cannot be a citizen of two countries. So I think what the government is hoping is that when the High Court has to consider this matter, and also a similar situation which is facing a couple of other MPs at the moment, that it will provide very clear grounds about what the interpretation of that section actually means.
Absolutely fascinating. Stephanie Peatling from Fairfax in Canberra. Thank you so much, Stephanie. In the meantime, Barnaby Joyce may want to go along to the upcoming Bledisloe Cup match and yell very loudly for the Wallabies. It's coming up to 6:15. The government has unveiled how it's planning to spend $100 million of social investment funding earmarked for mental health. The initiatives, which include a frontline mental health service in schools pilot, are focused on prevention and early intervention, but it doesn't appear that any of the money will be used to increase the pay of workers in community mental health care. In a high-level document leaked to Checkpoint, the Ministry of Health is warning DHBs against doing exactly that. Sent to all District Health Board Chief Executives on the 7th of July, the Ministry describes increased funding for mental health providers struggling to retain their staff after the pay equity settlement as, and I quote, unlawful. In fact, it's in block letters. Since the pay equity settlement saw increases for workers in aged and residential support care, but not for workers in mental health support, the mental health sector has been losing existing workers and really struggling to attract new ones, 20% more doing similar jobs in aged care. When announcing his 17 mental health initiatives this afternoon, Jonathan Coleman said the answer to dealing with mental health isn't just about money.
The demand has really ramped up, obviously way above population growth, but the answer to actually dealing with mental illness is not necessarily just more money. More money helps, but it's actually investing the type of programs in this package which will bend back that curve of demand over time. But I tell you, I was at the WHO about 2 months ago. All Western governments are confronted with the same issue, rapidly rising demand. We're living in a very pressured society, social media, social isolation and all the rest of it, and everyone is looking for new ways of doing things, and this is very much in line with that. So it's not a simple linear equation of increasing the funding as the demand for services goes up. It's all about doing things differently. And, expensive hospital beds, when people are very unwell, that's not the best way to do things on a range of counts. Firstly, it's far better to treat people early so they don't become so unwell. And secondly, if we can actually build resilience in the population in that very young school age, you're going to have people going through and living much more functional lives and becoming less likely to be unwell. I mean, that doesn't mean that we're going to be able to eliminate schizophrenia or some of these very serious end disorders, but dealing at the mild to moderate end before they evolve into full depressive illnesses, the evidence shows that we've got a high chance of really decreasing the incidence of serious mental illness.
It's Health Minister Jonathan Coleman speaking earlier this afternoon. National's endorsement of Peter Dunn in the Wellington electorate of Ohariu doesn't appear to be getting through to voters. The United Future leader has today refused to speak about the results of a Q&A Colmar-Brunton poll that puts Labour's Greg O'Connor pretty staggering 14 points ahead of him. National's Brett Hudson is in third place on 14%, despite blatantly telling people not to vote for him and to back Peter Dunn instead. We sent political reporter Craig McCulloch to Ohariu to look for Peter Dunn and ask voters what they think is going on.
Johnsonville Mall's an icon of Ohariu, and like most shopping centres, a great equaliser. Just Jeans alongside Michael Hill, Price Busters just round the corner. So I asked a cross-section of voters there, were they happy with Mr Dunn as their MP? Or after more than 30 years in the job, was it time for a change? Daniel Clark lives and works in the area and has voted for Mr Dunn in the past, but not this year.
I'm glad to see him going. He's had his time and there's some fresh new ideas that are needed, especially in this community. I won't be voting for him.
Who are you looking to for the new ideas?
The Labour MP, what's his name?
Greg O'Connor.
Greg O'Connor, thank you. Yeah, I'll probably be voting for him. He looks like he's got a bit of a groundswell coming through.
Nicky's in the same boat, a former Dunn voter who's jumped ship to Mr O'Connor.
It's not that he's done badly, but yeah, no, I definitely think a change is in order. Fresh face will be good for the area.
That sort of sentiment will have National worried. It wants Mr Dunn back in Parliament to act as a potential support partner. Its candidate, Brett Hudson, has been explicitly telling voters not to vote for him, to instead give their electorate tick to Mr Dunn. It's not a new strategy, but it's the first Logan Craig has heard of it.
I've probably been a national voter pretty much the whole time. Yeah, I haven't really swayed much from that, to be honest. So, yeah, I don't really know who else would be a candidate. Yeah, whether I'd look at Peter Dunn and his campaign and things like that or not. Richard Teo-Peters, also a long-time national voter. He backed Mr Hudson last election and is considering doing so again.
Oh yeah, I will vote. It's hard to decide because you're either getting one sour grape for another sour grape, so there's finding that balance to see who's actually capable of doing the job. I haven't actually seen any of them out and about, probably because it's winter.
Others know about the deal but don't think too much of it. Mark would rather give his vote directly to the National candidate.
I'd like to see National do well here, but obviously saying don't vote for the National candidate, so I haven't really decided whether I'm going to vote for Peter Dunn.
He and his friend Chris feel a changing mood. They say they think Mr Dunn's time is coming to a close.
I think he's going to push Peter Dunn pretty close, yeah. Might push him out, actually.
Yeah, I reckon he will.
Yeah.
You think people are ready for a change?
Well, absolutely, yeah. That's the main reason. Yeah, people have had enough of Peter Dunn. 30 years is enough.
But Mr Dunn still has his die-hard fans.
I've always voted for Peter Dunn because he's been very helpful to me with my properties in the past.
He's out there, he's active, you see him, he's part of that. To me, that's just what a local MP should be doing.
Yeah, I think he's great. He's done a lot for the community and he'll be getting my vote.
Mr Dunn didn't want to talk about the poll or his electorate today, but in a statement says there's still a long way to run till the election. From Johnsonville for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
Just a reminder before we move on from the good people who do traffic in Canterbury that State Highway 75, which is between Little River and Tautapu, is closed for the night. Not too far outside Christchurch. State Highway 75, closed for the night. Desperate Indian students who spent tens of thousands of dollars on tertiary courses and job fees are facing shame and humiliation after failing to gain residency in New Zealand. Support groups say a growing number of students are reaching the end of the road of their Kiwi dream, and many are depressed, anxious, and in some cases even suicidal. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen, who's been covering this story and doing really good work on it, spoke to one young man whose dreams of a new life in New Zealand have turned to dust.
Prince Johal came to New Zealand 10 years ago at the age of 18. He's spent tens of thousands of dollars on tertiary courses and recently paid $5,000 to an employer who exploited him before sacking him and cancelling his work visa. Now Prince has to leave the country within 14 days. He says the past decade has been a waste of time and money.
Outcome of these 10 years is not even zero. I am in minus $60,000-$70,000, and I have to build everything for my future again, and I have to sort out everything over. I don't know. It's so depressing.
Prince Johal says agents in his homeland are misleading young Indians about how easy it is to get jobs and gain New Zealand residency.
I don't say New Zealand education is bad, because it's all right, but it's the people who are representing it, it's totally, they are faking it. They show you something, but reality is far, far behind. They don't tell you how you get jobs.
Anu Kaloti from the Migrant Workers Association says a growing number of young Indians are in a similar situation, and many are desperate.
They cannot go back home and face their family and their friends and the society that they have come from, because they will be seen as a failure and they would be labelled as that forever. So we are seeing cases of mental illness, depression, anxiety and even suicides on the rise.
Anu Kaloti says there's been a jump in such cases because a large cohort has now exhausted their options for staying and because it's harder to find jobs that lead to residency. She says spending $60,000 to $70,000 on courses and illegal job fees is typical.
We do hear from a lot of students those kinds of sums of money. It's a huge cost that they pay. It's very difficult for their families back home to come up with that sort of money, and it's quite common back in India for families to sell their assets, sell their agricultural land.
Mandeep Singh Bella from First Union and the Indian Workers Association says many young Indians are deep in debt, and that makes them vulnerable to exploitation.
They're desperate to pay that money back, and local businesses, particularly Indian businesses, they would take those students and exploit them, basically. Let them work below minimum entitlements and, in some cases, slave-like conditions.
Mr Singh Bella believes the students are victims of education trafficking.
When you are saying there is $1 billion industry and you're trafficking people here because they're desperate, and then leave them with no choice but to be exploited, then there's a problem.
Mandeep Singh Bella says some students do gain residency by paying for jobs, but many fail. Immigration New Zealand says Indian students are more motivated than other groups to gain residency, and it's worked hard to reduce abuse of the system. More than 28,000 Indian students studied in New Zealand last year, though the number of new arrivals has halved in the past 12 months. For Checkpoint, John Gerritsen.
We haven't had any sport tonight, so let's have some now. Two-time Olympic medalist Nick Willis has a smile on his face despite finishing outside of the medals in the 1500 metres at the World Athletic Champs in London. Willis finished 8th. Kenyan runners took gold and silver. And fellow Kenyan Asbel Kiprop had been chasing a 4th straight World 1500 metre title, 4th straight, but finished 9th, passed by Willis on the home straight. In fact, entering that Willis had only a limited build-up to the event, he expected the Kenyans would dominate from the outset.
I assume the Kenyans would be wise to use their advantage this year is to be able to run a really fast time. They blitzed the field in Monaco just 3 weeks ago when they ran really fast times, and we were all several seconds behind. I was 6 seconds behind in Monaco, so they didn't push the pace in the first lap, and so suddenly I thought, okay, here we go, it's going to be a tactical race again. But then they took off after 400 metres and really dragged it out there. And so I try to just listen to my body and try and get the most out of what I could. And I was pretty proud with my performance after pretty limited build-up. But those guys were very good today, and 8th in the world. I've got a smile on my face, surprisingly. So, we take that as a real positive and stepping stone after these hiccups as we will start looking forward to the campaign for the Commonwealth Games in probably 7 or 8 months.
You mentioned beforehand that obviously your training, your build-up had gone well and there were good signs there. So did you perform as well as you might have hoped or perhaps not?
I really didn't know how it would go. That's the main thing. Afterwards, no, I'm pretty proud. I mean, you always hold a glimmer of hope that the unthinkable could happen. There's been so many surprises and upsets at these games. You don't want to rule out that possibility. But once the race ended up being a fast race, it took luck out of it, and that was my best run so far this season. So I can't ask for more than that.
What does this tell you about the Commonwealth Games, the Gold Coast? Does it mean you're on track? Does it make you reassess things, or what can you take, if anything at all?
Oh, it makes me really excited to know that off of very limited training, let's face it, it's 8 to 10 weeks I've been able to put in decent work, that I can still get 8th in the world. And with the Commonwealth Games, half of those guys won't be there, and I won't have to take any time off after the season because I've been off most of the year. So I'll just use this as a really good launch pad to get a really good base. And the best thing is I'm completely healthy, so I'm really excited to give this super endurance training a go and see what I can do over a 5K. I couldn't give that a go this year because I was only able to do limited training. So the Commonwealth schedule seems to make the 5K 15 double a possibility, and exciting that Asbel Kiprop says that he's going to give the 5K a go at the Commonwealth Games as well. So that should be fun to have him and I on the 5K at the start of the game. So that will keep me motivated in training.
It's Nick Willis talking to our sports editor Stephen Hewson. The number of drunken airline passengers being arrested in Britain has taken off. Figures obtained by BBC's Panorama programmes show 387 people were arrested in the year to February. That's a jump of 50%. The BBC's Tina Dahili has this report.
Where in the UK can you buy alcohol at 4 a.m. 7 days a week? The answer is at an international airport, and it seems that it's leaving passengers and crew with a hangover. An investigation by BBC Panorama has revealed that arrests of those suspected of being drunk at UK airports and on flights have risen by 50% in the past year. Half of the 4,000 cabin crew who took part in a survey carried out by Panorama and Unite the Union said they had either experienced or witnessed verbal, physical or sexual abuse by drunk passengers on board a UK flight.
People just see us as barmaids in the sky. They would touch your breasts, or they'd touch your bum or your legs, or, I mean, I've had hands going up my skirt before.
Phil Ward, the managing director of low-cost airline Jet2, has already banned alcohol sales on flights before 8 a.m. and wants the industry to take tougher measures. Do you think airports are doing enough?
I think they could do more. I think the retailers could do more as well. 2-litre steins of beer in bars, mixers and miniatures in duty-free shops, which can only be there for one reason.
But the Airport Operators Association insists that their code of practice does work.
I don't accept that the airports don't sell alcohol responsibly. The sale of alcohol, it per se, is not a problem. It's the misuse of it and drinking to excess and then behaving badly.
Earlier this year, a House of Lords committee called for airport licensing to be brought into line with pubs and bars. A government decision on whether to call time on early morning drinking at airports is now expected in the autumn.
That report from the BBC, Tina Dahili. Just before we go, police have released a name in relation to this shooting in Morrinsville on Sunday morning. They are looking to locate 36-year-old Rolly James Heke. Would like to speak with him in relation to the firearms incident in Morrinsville on Sunday morning. Heke is believed to be armed and dangerous and should not be approached. Any member of the public who sees Heke, or more likely, I suspect, knows where he is asked to call 111 immediately. That just in from police, ending checkpoint for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The union representing mental health workers says it's outrageous district health boards are being told not to pay them the same as aged care workers. The government has promised a transformation of mental health services for the young. Opposition politicians in Australia are demanding the Deputy Prime Minister stand aside until a court rules on his New Zealand citizenship. And fewer than half the claims on earthquake-damaged homes have been settled since the Kaikohe shake in November. Our next news and weather is at 7.
The RNZ app has had a makeover. Now you can find all the latest news and current events, listen live to all our stations, easily find programs and podcasts, and bookmark or download your favourites to carry with you. It looks and sounds better than ever, all without ads and completely free. You can find the RNZ app